Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the State Department. Very good. All right. To the task at hand. What's that?
The book. Really does.
It's all your questions, Saeed.
But
They add to my burden in more ways than one.
It's on both sides of the restraint. There's only a political solution to this.
Please. No, seriously, welcome to the State Department. I do have one thing to state at the top of the briefing, and it is a serious issue. The United States strongly condemns the barbaric murder of Nazim Uddin Samad, a law student who was apparently killed for speaking out against violent extremism in Bangladesh. And we offer our condolences to Mr. Samad's family and our unwavering support to the Bangladeshi people in their struggle against violent extremism. Nazim Uddin knew, and Bangladesh's history has shown, that violence will not defeat Bangladesh's proud tradition of free and independent discourse. So we stand with the Bangladeshi people in rejecting this vicious act and uniting to preserve a tolerant and inclusive society that protects freedom of expression. The United States will continue to support the government of Bangladesh in its efforts to combat terrorism, counter violent extremism, and bring to justice those who commit such heinous acts. Matt? Sorry.
Well, actually, let's just start with that. This is not the first time this has happened in Bangladesh, and the authorities there in the past have attributed these murders to radical Islamists. Are you prepared to make the same connection here? You said violent extremists. But
We don't have, so we've seen no claim of responsibility yet for the attack. As you note, previous attacks of this nature have been claimed by Al-Qaeda on the Indian subcontinent, but we just don't have clarity on this right now.
And then related to that,
Yeah, sure.
a couple months ago, human rights advocates wrote a letter to Secretary Kerry that talked about this wave of killings and asked him to see if it was possible to give people who are threatened in this way refuge in the U.S. Do you know what the status of that is?
So I think you're talking about humanitarian parole, which is a DHS-run process, but my understanding is that for a select number of bloggers who continue to be under imminent danger, that is one option that's under consideration. I don't know. I have to see if there are individuals who are taking advantage of that. I just don't have clarity on it.
Are they able to take advantage of it,
My
or is it
understanding
just
is
that
that
it's under consideration?
I'll get a little bit.
Well, we can ask
yeah.
if DHS runs this.
That's correct.
So state has nothing to do with it?
Well, we can probably get an update whether it's actually been, it's actually in train. I just don't know.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to go to something that came up the other day, but
Yep.
but now it's taken on an added element, and that is this Panama Papers leak. President Putin, you will have seen, said today that the leak of this, particularly the items that have to do with Russian nationals and Russia, are part of a Western or U.S. plot or campaign to undermine Russia. What do you make of that?
Look, I mean, we've, I think, made pretty clear that we're not going to talk about the content, obviously, these confidential papers that were leaked. I just reject, or I would reject the premise or the assertion that we're in any way involved in the actual leak of these documents.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's his accusation that the United States had anything to do with it, or the assertion by him or by anyone that the U.S. government had anything to do with this is, you say that's completely wrong?
That's right.
In a kind of unusual battle between the group that released this, or at least one of them, and WikiLeaks,
Yeah.
the WikiLeaks has pointed out that one of the groups that produced the story based on the Russia-related documents is funded by USAID.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
So this is I think you're referring to the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project.
Right.
So they have received support from various donors, including the U.S. government. This organization conducts investigative journalism, primarily, I think, in Europe. Obviously, these are the kind of organizations that USAID has and continues to fund, but not specifically for, to go after any particular government, but or any particular individual, but simply to conduct what we're supporting here is the conduct of independent investigative journalism that we believe can shine a light on corruption. Because as the secretary on down have said, corruption continues to have a corrosive effect on good governance around the world. So it's part of a core tenet of our foreign policy that we support organizations that go after corruption.
Do you believe that these
Sir.
leaked documents show corruption?
I think we're still looking, frankly, at whether they show corruption. I realize it's a several-day-old story now. We talked about the fact that Treasury OFAC would actually look into some of these allegations or some of the content of this, and that is their writ to do so. I don't have anything to pronounce today, though.
All right. Because there was a USAID-funded organization that was involved, did you guys have any prior notice that this was coming?
Not to my knowledge, no. No. I just don't,
I mean-
I personally, when I say not to my knowledge, I personally
Well,
do
I
not
mean,
know. And I'm not
USAID
aware, so Matt, I'm not aware that we had any
USAID
prior knowledge.
has given money for,
No,
a variety of
yeah.
things, some of which some people believe are kind of suspect, such as the whole Cuban Twitter or whatever it was, the Zinzeo or what, I can't remember the name of it, but, so, and
so-
they knew that was going on, so, I mean.
So, again, to the extent of my knowledge and understanding of this incident or this issue, we had no prior knowledge. And in fact, we have no editorial control, certainly, over what this organization does or doesn't do with the money that we give it, or what it does in its, to conduct its investigative
But
journalism.
obviously you believe in the cause
Of
that
course,
it's
yes,
doing.
of
And
course.
so you.
That's why we
give
support it.
You believe that its work, that the work that it produces is
Valuable.
valuable and fair and
Yes.
credible?
Yes, I mean, again, we just,
So,
but,
In fact, then, in essence, you would, you support the publication of this stuff, right?
look, so this organization, and again, I would remind you that it was part of, I think, some 200 or so journalists at over 100 of the most well-known and respected media outlets around the world. So it was hardly this organization alone that
Right,
brought
no,
this
I
story to
understand
light.
that.
Without, and let's also, a lot of professional organizations, AP included, Reuters included, covered the WikiLeaks and used what we deem classified material and covered their stories. So, I mean, it's not as though news organizations, credible professional news organizations, have not mined quote
sure.
unquote classified information in the past.
I'm not in any way trying to question
okay.
this organization's credibility. I'm just
understand,
trying to
okay.
find out what the U.S. government's position is as it relates to that.
I'm just, sure, I'm just saying we have no editorial control over
Okay.
what, over their, over their reporting. They're allowed to and permitted to cover whatever they want.
So you would say it's not up to you to
Right,
stand
correct.
by
Thank you.
or to
Correct.
not
That's
stand by
correct.
their reporting. Okay,
That's
last
correct.
one on this. In the cases of WikiLeaks and the Snowden documents, the U.S. government quite loudly talked about how this was stolen, this material was stolen, and that you want to prosecute. And in fact, Bradley or Chelsea Manning has been prosecuted, and you have made no secret of the fact that you would like to see Mr. Snowden brought back and him to stand trial. In light of this, do you think that the hacking, which the law firm says it was a victim of, is theft. Do you regard these documents as having been stolen?
I would say that's a question for the Panamanian legal system or legal process to decide on. This happened in Panama. I don't have enough, I don't think we have enough details about,
Well, the firm is in Panama. I don't know
Right.
that. Do you know that it happened in Panama?
that's a fair question. I don't know whether we've made a determination whether we believe this was actually stolen. Or that there was criminal activity here.
Well, they say that it was.
I understand
The law
that.
firm says that it
I
was.
understand that. And,
So-
and like I said, what we've seen
But do you
is that
think
these
that that law
documents
firm,
were,
well, you called them confidential before.
Correct.
So, that it's not, the law firm's not a government that doesn't
Correct.
can't classify things.
correct.
But if someone comes across hundreds of thousands of pages of confidential documents and publishes them, and they were clearly not meant to be, seen by the public, you don't think that that's theft?
Again, I just,
I mean, the firm clearly didn't want this stuff
Of
out
course.
there. They wouldn't
Of
have
course.
given it out
And we have spoken in the
themselves.
past about the fact that every profession, including the legal profession, should have some degree of confidentiality. I just don't, I can't speak at this time whether we're going to pronounce on whether this was theft or not. Sure thing.
You've probably seen the Human Rights Watch report overnight, which said that they have evidence that US-supplied bombs had killed 97 civilians and stuff in Yemen on March 15. Is it your understanding, or have you got any independent verification that these were US, that their investigation outcome is true?
So Leslie, we don't, and the Secretary actually spoke to this in the press avail that he did recently in Bahrain. He was asked this very question. No worries. So no clarity is what he said. We just don't have the clarity right now what type of weapon may or may not have been used. But then, of course, he said very strongly that we need to see an end to all combat operations in Yemen. We need to see the continuation of the peace process, and we need to see a ceasefire take place. But I just would say we're obviously take these reports very seriously. Certainly, we've spoken in the past and continue to speak out against civilian casualties, and we'll just look into it. We just don't have any more details
So
there.
is there going to be an investigation from your side?
I think we're looking into it. I don't know if I don't
you don't know if that's a formal
classify that as a
investigation?
formal investigation, but I'm certainly aware that we're looking into the details.
Do you know, Mark?
Yes, sir.
If the type of bomb that was described by Human Rights Watch is a type, or is
I don't.
is among the things that the State Department, in coordination with the Pentagon, actually signs off on. So,
Yeah,
no.
I don't have that.
On this
Please.
topic and other
Yep.
issues in the press conference. But on this very issue, I mean, most everybody thinks or suggests or knows that the Saudis use almost 100% of their weapons are American weapons in this case. Why would you not conduct an investigation?
Well, again, we're certainly concerned by any credible allegations of civilian deaths or attacks on civilians. Our understanding is that the coalition is going to conduct an investigation of the incident. We've encouraged them to do so in a prompt manner. We believe the need for an investigation, or there is a need for an investigation. I know that the Saudis have also formed a committee or announced the formation of a committee that will evaluate military targeting writ large, that they say will ensure the protection of civilians and investigate these kinds of incidents. We've encouraged them to do so, to carry out an investigation, so we'll wait and see the results of that investigation.
So you are fine with Saudi Arabia investigating itself in this case?
I think, they have said they are going to do it. They've established this commission. We'll wait and see what the results are.
Yeah. Also, during the press conference, the secretary was almost, or came across, I may be wrong, as non-committal on the issue of human rights in Bahrain and other areas. Are you guys sort of trying to, whatever, repair damage maybe with the Saudis and the Gulf countries at the expense of human rights? Or perceived damage. I don't know if there are.
No, I mean,
damage in the
I mean,
relationship.
frankly, he spoke a fair amount on human rights. I mean, certainly at the press availability that he did with the Bahraini foreign minister. And I know that he did also meet this afternoon in Bahrain with members of the opposition and civil society. It was a brief meeting, but they did discuss or provide an opportunity for him to hear their perspectives on the political situation in Bahrain, and also hear from them directly about their views on human rights, on expression and dissent in the kingdom. And he spoke also in his press avail that about some of the steps that Bahrain has made, and they have made some steps, and we've talked about these before, but that more work needs to be done.
What are these steps? I mean, he talks about inclusive.
Well, they established these.
Power sharing, more liberalization. What are these?
Well,
steps?
so I mean, there was a serious effort, we believe, by the Bahraini government a few years back. There were a number of entities created with an ombudsman, and with the goal of bringing people together. The opposition did boycott the previous election, but they did discuss today the upcoming election, 2018, and the prospects for those elections. And frankly, some of the work that needs to be done over the next few months so that these are full, free, fair, and transparent elections. And I think that's where the focus is right now.
India, Pakistan?
Please.
The Pakistanis have arrested, they say, as an agent of India in Balochistan. They say that he was fomenting the insurgency that they have there. And since they've protested this arrest, the Pakistani ambassador to Delhi has said that the talks between the two countries are frozen while this is being looked into, that there's been a breakdown in the Pakistani-Indian rapprochement as a result of this. I don't know if you have any information about the arrest itself, whether the US is aware of that particular case, but also more broadly on the geopolitical implications if there is a...
I don't have anything I'm aware of the reports about the arrest. I don't have anything any details of the arrest. More directly to your question about the suspension of peace talks, the peace process, we believe, and it's been our longstanding position, that India and Pakistan stand to benefit from the normalization of relations and practical cooperation, and we encourage them to do so, to engage in direct dialogue that's aimed at reducing tensions between the two governments and the two countries. And we strongly support those efforts because we believe it obviously will lead to greater stability and peace in the region, and is to the benefit of both countries. Please, in the back, you want to?
Yeah, to return to human rights. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay. We can go.
Okay.
I'll go with you first, and then to you.
Sure.
Please. Are you still in Pakistan, or are you in different?
I'm on human rights in the Gulf.
In the Gulf. Okay.
Yeah,
Do you want to go to Pakistan, or we
Yeah,
finish
I'm
up with
gonna
that?
go after
Apologize.
that.
Yep.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Thanks so much.
For the last couple of days, the Panama Papers hitting the headlines all around the world. We have seen the Prime Minister of Iceland already stepped down after the allegations of corruption. So the family of Pakistani Prime Minister, Mr. Sharif, was also involved in the offshore companies and the corruption. And there is immense pressure on him to resign. So how United States watching this situation?
Look, I mean, there's lots of churn, if I could put it that way, coming out of the leaking of these documents. We've not, frankly, commented on some of the allegations or some of the reporting that's going on about this. We don't necessarily want to comment on the findings. We don't normally comment on, what we consider to be leaked information. I think, globally speaking, and we talked about this, that if there is a perception of corruption, then that is damaging, and that's up to governments around the world to address if it affects them or speaks to their conduct. we can't say categorically that corruption is taking place or that this is somehow criminal activity. We just don't have that kind of clarity on this information. But we continue through our own Department of Treasury to look at the details of some of these findings in order to have a better sense of what might be happening in global markets and global financial system to get a better understanding of whether corruption is taking place. But we just don't have anything to pronounce on any of these findings thus far.
Sir, the Pakistani security forces have launched the military operation in the province of Punjab, and they have arrested the top Taliban commanders and two of the other extremist groups. So, but they are not getting, according to the army, they are not getting support of the Punjab government due to their vote bank in southern Punjab.
You're talking about
The military
where's this in
operation,
Kashmir?
no, sir, not Kashmir. It's the southern Punjab. The recently started operation there, but they are not getting support of the Punjab government because they have big vote bank there. So, I mean, are you in contact with the Pakistan?
I'm not aware of the incident. I have to look into it. I apologize. I just don't have.
So I have one more question. So
Yes, sir,
the
please.
former Prime Minister of Pakistani Kashmir side has told the parliament in Pakistan that he informed the State Department that the Kashmiris are again crying for the jihad in Kashmir because of the Indian forces' brutalities there. Is it a concern for the United States?
Well, and forgive me, I thought that's what you're referring to in your last question. I'm aware of those allegations. Look, our policy regarding Kashmir has not changed. As we've long said, the pace, scope, and character of those discussions, or any discussions on Kashmir, must be for the two sides to determine. We support any and all positive steps that India and Pakistan can take to forge closer relations. Obviously, I talked about that in response to Dave's question, but I think I'll leave it there.
One last question, please.
Sure, of course.
So it's about Asia Bibi, a Christian woman who's in the jail for the last many years on blasphemy laws. So the ambassador Sebastian told a gathering here the United States is working closely with Pakistan for her release. Is there any update on this?
I'm sorry, one more time, the person you're talking about?
So Ambassador Sebastian, the religious.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, you're talking about remarks about Asia Bibi. Yeah, of course. I just say that our stance on religious freedom around the world is well documented, obviously in our annual Religious Freedom and Human Rights Report. We oppose blasphemy laws throughout the world. Freedom of religion is a fundamental human right. It's something we regard as a fundamental human right. And certainly the work of Ambassador Saperstein is part of our regular engagement with the government of Pakistan to advance this right. Please, sir.
So
Now we're on
the Gulf, the UAE.
Okay.
So 32 Americans, Mohammed and Kamal Al-Darat, they've been in jail in the UAE since August 2014, and Monday is their final court appearance. The charges against them were initially related to terror, and the UAE ambassador here, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, said they were thought to be linked to groups designated by the UAE and the US. Those charges have been dropped, and the families are now worried that shows they're going to be convicted and sentenced come Monday. Does the change in charges raise any concerns about due process, which the UN has already said isn't being provided to these Americans? And does it change the American approach from you guys to helping these families?
So we do understand that at a hearing held on March 21st that the prosecutor did amend the charges providing material support to two terrorist groups to charges of supporting armed terrorist groups without permission from the UAE government. And this change placed the case under a 2008 anti-terrorism law instead of the 2014 law. I'd say we're concerned about several aspects of the Al-Darat's case. Certainly allegations of mistreatment, as well as their ongoing health issues, their lack of access to legal representation, as well as the lack of consular access, certainly at the start of their detention. And we've raised all these issues with the UAE government, and we continue to call for we continue to call for an expeditious resolution to this case via a fair and transparent legal process in accordance with local law. Yeah, do you have a follow-up?
I just had a follow-up
It's
saying,
okay.
via a fair and transparent process, would that mean you don't consider the current process, which will conclude on Monday, a fair and transparent process?
I'd say we have concerns thus far, as I outlined. And so what I think we want to see is a quick resolution to this case. And as I said, through a process that's free and fair.
Just since March 21st, has the approach changed at all from your end, given that the charges changed?
I'm not sure. I mean, we continue to obviously follow the case very closely. Our personnel from the U.S. Embassy, diplomats, attended the January 18th hearing, the February 15th hearing, February 29th hearing, as well as the March 21st hearing. And we're going to continue to attend subsequent hearings. We're going to continue to express our concerns about the case and our concerns for the welfare of the Eldorats to the government in UAE. Please.
Syria?
Of course.
Okay. First of all, have you had any more information since yesterday on what kind of missile was used to
I
bring down
don't.
the
I apologize.
Syrian?
I don't have any more information
And
on that.
second, do you have any comment on the kidnapping or apparent kidnapping of 300 Syrian workers today from?
Yes, you're
yes.
talking about this. I don't. I mean, we're
The
seeking
cement
more information.
factory or
No, I
something.
just found out before we walked out here. Can't confirm. You're talking about the reports that ISIL
Right.
has, or
Right,
Daesh
has
has.
kidnapped like
Yeah,
300
no, if we get an
workers.
update on that, we'll let you guys know, of course.
Okay.
Sorry, who are you seeking this more information from?
We're just trying to get more clarity on not from Daesh, of course, but I mean, as you know, we've
No,
seen
I
reports.
wasn't, but I mean, you don't have any contact with the
No.
Syrian government. They're
Fair
the
point.
ones who say that.
Fair point. We just had seen reports. We just don't have. We
Would
don't
you
have any
seek
details.
to have any clarification from the Syrian government? I think they are working for a government-owned factory.
That's again, we're operating on the same scant information as you all are on this. We just had seen reports, so if we get any further depth or information, we'll certainly share that with you. But
Still on Syria, the
Yeah.
rebel groups are claiming that they've cut a vital ISIS supply line from the Turkish border down into IS territory or Daesh territory in Syria. There seems to be a lot of different groups making advances in various parts against IS, and they may be beginning to collapse. Is there a concern that if obviously you want to defeat Daesh, but is there a concern that Assad and the Russians might get to Raqqa before you, and is that or does that be a bad thing?
well, a couple of thoughts on that. One is, as you correctly note, part of the sorry, I'm grasping for the word, but one of the results of the cessation of hostilities is that these groups, many of them have now are able to focus on taking the fight to Daesh, and we've seen the same thing, as you said, on the part of the regime forces, who certainly made advances on and around Palmyra, and this is, I think, part and parcel of what we've seen in Iraq as well, which is that Daesh is under increasing pressure from all sides and from different components and different groups, different governments. I mean, it is somewhat of a rare thing to have the kind of unity of purpose that everyone recognizes how evil Daesh is, how destructive it is to the region and to the world, that you have such, as I said, a unity of purpose to go out and destroy and defeat Daesh on the ground. As to those gains made by the regime with support of obviously Russian forces, we certainly looked at the liberation of Palmyra as a good thing. That city has suffered tremendously under ISIL, not only the people of Palmyra, of course, but also the destruction of, a vast amount of its antiquities. But we also made clear at the time that it's a bit of it's a difficult thing for people to be liberated from Daesh, only to fall under the rule of a regime that has brutalized its own people. So it's hardly a win-win situation, to be perfectly candid. In terms of who might get to Raqqa first, or who might liberate to Raqqa, or might liberate Raqqa first, we just don't. It's we're not there yet. There's still a lot of hard fighting and by all parties involved that lies ahead. We're going to continue our pressure, working with the coalition, working with the various groups that we're working with on the ground in Syria as well as in Iraq to continue to squeeze Daesh as much as possible. Please.
Yesterday,
Value in working with the Russians and the regime?
Well, we have, we have talked about that, and we have in fact said if Russia does want to play a constructive role in taking the fight against Daesh, that we would be willing to have that conversation. I know that, I know that, and this was part of the conversation that they did have, in fact, in Moscow when the Secretary was there. Again, it is at the same time as we appreciate as I said, any relief that can come to the Syrian people who've been brutalized by ISIL. We're not convinced that the regime offers the ultimate solution. What the ultimate solution to the situation in Syria is a transitional government rather, that is supported by all the Syrian people.
yesterday,
Yes, sir.
and this is moving on. Yesterday, you said that you did not want to speak to the referendum in the Netherlands because the Dutch people have not spoken. Well, they have spoken. Not a huge,
No, I wouldn't
overwhelming
call it.
majority of them, but enough to make the referendum valid.
Yes.
And they pretty, they made their feelings quite clear. They don't like the EU-Ukraine deal. So now that they have spoken, what do you have to say about it?
We have seen those reports. We've seen about the non-binding referendum. Look, clearly we're disappointed by the results, but we do respect the views of the Dutch people, and we respect the Dutch political process. We understand, there's still a process in place. I refer to the Dutch government with regard to what next steps are imminent. We said before, and we'll say it again today, we believe this association agreement is in the best interest of Ukraine, the U.S., and the European Union, and we still stand by that.
You know that it's a non-binding
That's correct.
vote, but the Dutch Prime Minister said that he doesn't feel politically
That's
that he
correct.
can ignore it. Would you urge the Prime Minister of Holland to ignore the will of his people?
There's where I'm going to draw the line in stepping into what is an internal political process, and we respect that.
No, can I just tell you one quick one?
course.
So
Always.
the question here, since we raised yesterday. So the question here is whether you think this in any way could have implications for Ukraine, who you are supporting.
Well, I don't think we know yet. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's it.
I don't think we know yet, and I think President Poroshenko said that they're going to continue to work towards an association agreement, take the steps they need to take in terms of reforms and other measures. We support them in those efforts. This was something that was agreed by all other members and ratified by all other members of the EU. So there is support for this. But
The question is
yeah,
whether
please.
this would undermine anything that Poroshenko wants to do with having closer ties with Europe, and which is really what started this entire thing, because
It was.
they were looking for closer ties with the West rather than looking towards Moscow, right?
Of course, and it's our, I guess, hope that it doesn't affect that process to continue. Closer ties to the West, closer ties with the EU. As we've long said, it's not for us, it's not for Russia, it's not for anyone to decide which way or which path Ukraine wants to pursue, but it should have the right to. The Ukrainian people should have the right to pursue closer ties with the West if it wants to. and stronger economic ties and stronger democratic institutions. That's its own right, sovereign right. Please, sir. I'm sorry, I apologize. You had a question,
Yes,
and then
thank
I
you.
get to you. I apologize. Yeah.
Just on the Futenma Air Base, back in March, the Japanese government had accepted a court-mediated settlement plan, which has further delayed the relocation process. I just wondered if you had any updates on the current status of the plan, or if there are any alternative plans in place.
I don't believe I have any. You're talking about, I'm sorry, the settlement?
Right, the Okinawa, the Futenma Air Base.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, we don't have any kind of update on the ongoing legal process. Obviously, we remain committed to the plan to construct Futenma, the replacement facility there. And we continue to believe that it's the only plan that really adequately addresses the operational, political, financial, strategic concerns. But I would refer you to the government of Japan to really speak to that process. Please.
Follow up on that.
Yep.
Is the Futenma issue going to be something that Secretary Kerry discusses with Prime Minister or Foreign Minister Kishida on his trip to Japan?
I just can't predict what they might discuss in a bilateral setting. I can imagine it could come up. It's hard for me to say that today when it's several days away.
Sure.
But we'll give you a readout, obviously.
Thank you.
Please, sir.
Excuse me, I haven't seen it. Is Secretary Kerry extending his visit to Baghdad and Erbil tomorrow?
I don't have anything to announce on that.
Okay. And one more question on President Erdogan. I really don't know if you've answered this one too. President Erdogan said that the supporters of quote-unquote terrorists, PKK terrorists, should be stripped of citizenship. Do you have a statement on that?
Well, I guess I'd refer you to the government of Turkey for questions regarding President Erdogan's remarks. I guess, well, we would say that in any constitutional democracy, it's important that questions of citizenship be addressed within a legal framework that upholds rule of law and ensures due process. Yes, Saeed.
A couple of questions on the Palestinian-Israeli issue.
Of course.
Very quickly. I wanted to ask you if you have any comment or reaction to some reports that say that Abbas is fixing to meet with French President Hollande and Russian President Putin to see if they can get the process moving forward. The French suggestion.
This French proposal.
The French proposal. I wonder if you have any comment on that.
I don't specifically in terms of potential meetings between President Abbas and the French. I know this was something that Foreign Minister Ayrault did raise with Secretary Kerry. It's a clear focus for the French government. We have since then had initial discussions with them about this initiative. Look forward to further engagement on it. We share the same goal, as do many others, but that's to find a constructive way forward in terms of advancing as I said, our goal of a two-state solution. But as to specific meetings between the French and Abbas, I just don't have any details.
Now, in the past, you dismissed out of hand any kind of international effort to deal with this issue, opting for direct negotiations. Is that still your position? Or would you support an international effort of any kind?
I just don't think we're there yet in terms of any concrete path towards direct negotiations. As you correctly state, we have always supported direct negotiations, but there's still some spade work to be done in order to create the kind of conditions that would lead to direct negotiations. How that spade work's done, preliminary work is done, I think is open for discussion.
And finally, Abbas called on the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to sort of have a mutual and immediate kind of end to a mutual incitement and so on. Is that something that you support? Do you hold them both at the same level of being guilty of incitement? And
Well,
so on?
I'll just answer it this way, which is that there needs to be a general de-escalation, not an escalation of rhetoric by either side in order to, frankly, end the violence. That said, we strongly support Israel's right to self-defense in the wake of violent attacks against its citizens. But we would, I say, welcome any kind of efforts to de-escalate tensions overall. Please, sir.
Can I just ask you, this is related, are you aware of complaints from Christian groups about the destruction of a Byzantine-era Christian church that was uncovered by construction workers in Gaza? And if
I'm
you're
not, honestly, yeah.
If you're not, you're just looking to,
Of
is this
course.
something that you guys take an interest in, that the issue and whether
Yep.
or not it's problematic, whether it was intentional?
I'll take a look at it. Yeah, we'll take a look at it. Yeah, great. Thanks, guys.